The winter fog lay thick over Whitmore Manor, heavy as an unspoken shame. The cold crept through the stone halls, yet laughter rang warm and sharp from the drawing room. It was the kind of laughter that cut deeper than silence ever could. Elenina Whitmore stood just outside the door, her gloved hands clasped tightly at her waist, listening as if her feet had rooted to the floor against her will. "They say Prince Alexander is seeking a bride again," Caroline said, her voice smooth and amused. "He's invited half the noble families to present their daughters." Lydia laughed, light and careless. "Imagine that, Elenina. Perhaps you should apply. If the court has lowered its standards this year." The room erupted in laughter. Teacups rattled. Someone clapped. Elenina tried to step away, but Lord Pembroke's voice stopped her cold. He was a frequent guest, a friend of her father's, and a man who enjoyed cruelty as much as others enjoyed fine wine. Now, he said, pretending thoughtfulness. "Miss Elenina does have her charms. Very modest ones, of course, hidden beneath all that gray, but charms nonetheless. Why not send her portrait to London? The court could use a little entertainment." Her mother smiled faintly, saying nothing. Her father frowned, not in defense, but in discomfort. "You go too far, Pembroke," Lord Whitmore said lightly. But Pembroke was already pleased with himself. Not at all. Imagine the prince opening a proposal from your plain daughter. London would talk for weeks. Elenina felt the laughter strike her like blows. She did not cry. She did not run. Some foolish part of her waited for someone to stop it. No one did. "Why stop at a portrait?" Pembroke continued. "Let the girl deliver it herself. The prince is fond of charity." Lydia clapped her hands. "Oh yes, let Elenina go. We'll say she's admired him from afar." "That would be cruel," her mother murmured, waving her fan. "It would be memorable." Caroline turned and looked straight at Elenina. "You should be grateful. Few women ever meet a prince, even as a joke." At last Elenina found her voice. "And if he laughs?" Pembroke smiled. "Then you will have served your purpose well, my dear." That night Elenina sat alone in her small room beneath the eaves. The fire burned low. The mirror on her table was cracked, and the face within it looked pale and ordinary. Not ugly, not beautiful, just unnoticed. Footsteps came softly. Mrs. Bird, Holly, the housekeeper, entered with a candle. "Child," she said gently, "don't listen to them." "They only say what everyone thinks," Elenina replied. "Then let the world think, Mrs. Donnelly said. You have more heart than all of them combined." She hesitated. "The carriage leaves at dawn." Elenina's fingers tightened. "So it's decided." "Your father signed the letter himself." Elenina nodded. Something settled quietly inside her. So be it. At dawn, frost clung to the windows as she stepped into the cold. No one came to say goodbye except Mrs. Pear, Holly, who pressed a small prayer book into her hands. "Hold your head high," the woman whispered. "Kindness changes rooms when it enters." The carriage rolled away as Whitmore Manor vanished into the mist. Elenina whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. I will not." The road to London stretched long and gray. Villages passed in silence. Children waved. Chimney smoke curled into the sky. She had time to think, too much time. She remembered mirrors, stolen glances, and Lord Pembroke's smile. She had been invisible all her life. Now she was a spectacle. Yet beneath the fear, something steadier grew. If she was to be humiliated, she would endure it with dignity. On the third day, London rose from the fog, vast and alive. Gas lamps blurred in the mist. The palace gates opened to a courtyard filled with carriages and laughter. This was no quiet visit. It was a display. "Miss Whitmore," the footman announced flatly. She stepped down, clutching her small bag. Whispers followed her. "That's her. The plain one. Poor thing." Inside, the ballroom shimmered with light. Chandeliers glittered. Music floated through the air. Then a voice rang out. "Miss Elenina Whitmore, daughter of Lord and Lady Whitmore of Kent." Heads turned. Laughter rippled. At the far end stood Prince Alexander, tall, dark-haired, unreadable. Elenina curtsied. "Your Highness." He inclined his head. "Miss Whitmore, you have traveled far. Would you honor me with a dance?" Silence fell like snow. She looked up in disbelief. "Your Highness?" "Then we shall learn together," he said, offering his arm. They danced. Her steps were careful, his guidance gentle. "Did you come willingly?" he asked quietly. "Does it matter? It matters to me." "No," she said softly. "I was sent." He studied her face. "You are braver than most." Or simply tired of hiding. When the music ended, whispers returned sharper than before. She moved away, seeking quiet. Laughter followed her into the shadows. Then a voice spoke behind her. "Did you know it was meant as a joke?" She turned. Prince Alexander stood there, anger flickering in his eyes. "I knew," she said, "or suspected, and still you came. When family commands, obedience is all that remains." "You will stay," he said after a moment. "My sister needs a companion, as you command." Days passed. Gossip spread. Princess Charlotte welcomed her warmly. Servants grew kind. The prince watched her with quiet curiosity. One afternoon, laughter turned cruel again in the library, until Alexander's voice cut through it. "Cruelty is not wit," he said coldly. When they were alone, he said, "You do not pretend." "I would not know how." "You unsettle this place," he said. "Perhaps that is needed." That night, a note appeared beneath her door. "Leave while you can." Another followed. "The truth follows you." Then, at last, a knock. Alexander stood there, reading the note with a darkened face. Someone wished to drive her away. Moments later, a servant interrupted. "Your Highness, the council calls you. It concerns Miss Whitmore's family." Alexander turned to her sharply. "Stay here. Do not leave." The door closed. Silence fell. Far below, in the council chamber, a document lay open. Her father's name, accusations of treason, and Elena Whitmore, once a joke, now stood at the edge of something far more dangerous than laughter. Morning light crept weakly into Elena's chamber, pale and uncertain, as if even the sun feared what the day would bring. She had not slept. Every sound in the corridor made her heart jump. Every distant voice felt like judgment drawing closer. When footsteps finally stopped outside her door, she rose at once, her hands trembling. The knock was firm, official. "Miss Whitmore," a palace messenger said when she opened the door, "by order of His Majesty, you are to prepare to depart immediately. A carriage will be ready within the hour." The words struck harder than any laughter ever had. "Depart," she repeated quietly. "Yes, miss. Until further notice. Has the prince spoken of this?" The man avoided her eyes. "I am not at liberty to say." When the door closed, the room felt suddenly smaller. The walls that had once felt safe now pressed in around her. She moved slowly to the desk and sat down, her breath shallow. So this was the end of her strange place at court, not with mockery, but with exile. She reached for a sheet of paper and wrote carefully, each word steady though her heart was not. "Your Highness, I am told I must leave. I do not know what has been said, only that I regret causing you trouble. Your kindness will remain my truest memory of London. I ask for no defense, only that you remember I never sought favor, only dignity." She sealed the letter and left it behind, her name written simply across the front. Princess Charlotte met her on the staircase, pale and breathless. "Tell me this isn't true," she said. "My brother is furious." He argued until the council shouted him down. "I must go," Elenina said gently. "It is better this way." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "You brought him peace." For once he smiled without weight. "That is enough for me," Elena said softly. The carriage waited in the courtyard. As it rolled away, she did not look back, though she felt the palace watching her like a silent witness. High above, Alexander stood at a window, fists clenched as the carriage disappeared into the fog. Anger burned hot and useless in his chest. He turned sharply to his aide. "Find Lord Pembroke," he ordered. "Now." The confrontation was brief and cold. Evidence followed quickly. Forged letters, a steward's confession, lies layered carefully enough to fool a council too eager to believe them. "Ride to Kent," Alexander told Captain Grey. "Search Whitmore Manor. Bring me the truth." While London whispered, Elelena returned to Kent. Whitmore Manor greeted her with cold stone and colder looks. Her mother spoke of appearances. Her sisters avoided her. Only the fields beyond her window felt honest. Yet peace did not come. Another letter arrived, unsigned. "If you value his crown, leave England." That night she packed quietly. Before dawn she left Whitmore Manor without farewell, her carriage turning toward the southern road. Alexander learned of it too late. "She's leaving Kent," Grey reported, taking the road south. Alexander did not hesitate. "Saddle my horse." They met at a crossroads by the river, mist curling low over the water. Elena had stepped out to stretch when she heard hooves behind her. She turned, and her breath caught. "Your Highness," she said, shock flashing across her face. "You should have waited," he said, dismounting. "For what?" she asked. "More scandal? More pity?" "For the truth," he said, holding out a folded parchment. Pembroke forged the accusation. "Your father was innocent." Her hands trembled as she took it. "You risked much for this. I would risk more." She shook her head. "Then let this be farewell. You have given me my name back. That is enough." He watched her climb into the carriage, helpless as it rolled away once more. Back in London, the truth exploded through the council. Pembroke was stripped of favor, yet victory tasted bitter. Elena was gone. Then her letter arrived. "Do not seek me. I go where I can do no harm." Alexander crushed the paper in his hand. "Prepare a horse," he said. "She rides toward the coast." Elena reached the harbor at dawn. The sea stretched wide and gray, promising forgetfulness. As she stood waiting to board, a familiar voice called her name. She turned. Alexander stood there, breathless, determined. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "You will lose everything." "Then let me lose it for something worth keeping," he said, taking her hands. Royal guards arrived, bearing the decree. Alexander stepped back at her, pleading. "Go," she begged. "Face them. Do not fall for me." He mounted his horse, eyes never leaving hers. "I will return." When he was gone, she sank to her knees as the ship's bell rang. Then more riders appeared. Captain Grey dismounted. "You must come," he said urgently. "The council turns against the prince. Without you, they will break him." Elelena closed her eyes. Fate gave her no gentle choices, only necessary ones. "I will go," she said. Rain fell hard as they rode toward London. The council chamber was loud with accusation when she entered. Alexander stood surrounded, defiant but alone. "There she is," someone sneered. "The cause of it all." Elena stepped forward. "I am the cause," she said clearly, "the cause of truth." She spoke without fear, of mockery, of lies, of men who mistook pride for honor. Her words cracked the room's certainty. When the king entered, silence fell. She placed the confession in his hands. He read slowly, his face changing. "The accusation was false," he said at last. The chancellor protested. Alexander stood firm. "I will not renounce truth for convenience." The king dismissed the council. Alone, he looked at them both, something old and tired in his eyes. "I once buried my heart for duty," he said quietly. "Perhaps I was wrong." He left them with dawn approaching and judgment still uncertain. As bells rang across the city, Elelena stood beside Alexander. Fear and hope tangled together. Whatever came next would change them both. And this time, she would not run. Dawn crept into the palace like a held breath. Pale light slipped through tall windows, touching the marble floors and the tired faces of guards who had not slept. The bells rang again, calling the council to gather once more. This time, the sound carried finality. Elena stood beside Alexander in a quiet antechamber. Neither spoke. Words felt too fragile for what waited beyond the doors. She folded her hands to keep them from shaking. Alexander watched the light move across the floor, his jaw set, his shoulders steady. "If they ask you to leave," he said at last, "I will not let you walk out alone." She looked at him gently. "And if they ask you to give up everything, then I will answer honestly." The doors opened. A servant bowed. "His Majesty summons you." The council chamber was full. Nobles lined the walls. Some faces were hard, others uncertain. At the far end, the king sat beneath the crown, his expression grave, older than it had been days before. Alexander and Elelena stepped forward together. The chancellor spoke first, his voice sharp with restraint. "Your Majesty, the council has reviewed the matter. Though the accusation against the Whitmore family was false, the prince's conduct remains concerning. His refusal to accept the Northern Alliance threatens the stability of the realm." A low murmur followed. The king raised a hand. Silence returned. "My son," he said, "you know the cost of this path. Speak now." Alexander stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it carried through the chamber. "I was raised to believe a crown is worn for the good of the people, not to protect pride, not to trade lives and hearts like coin. If peace demands dishonesty, then it is not peace. I will not marry without truth, and I will not rule without conscience." The chancellor scoffed. "You would risk war for a woman." Alexander turned toward Elelena, then back to the council. "I would risk comfort for honesty. She is not my weakness. She is the proof that this court has forgotten what honor looks like." A stir moved through the chamber. Elelena took a breath and stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady, "if my presence endangers the crown, I will leave. I have done so before. I ask only that you judge him fairly." He did not act from recklessness, but from decency. The king studied her for a long moment. The room waited. "You would sacrifice yourself again," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "because I love him enough to do so." Something shifted in the king's expression. Weariness, memory. "I once loved a woman my father forbade," he said slowly. "I chose duty and called it wisdom. I ruled well, but I ruled empty. I will not force my son into the same silence." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The chancellor stepped forward in alarm. "Your Majesty, the alliance is not worth my son's soul." The king interrupted sharply. "Nor the integrity of this crown." He rose to his feet. "I will not compel my heir to marry against his heart. Let the northern dukedom withdraw if it must. England will stand without bargains made in fear." The chamber erupted. Some protested. Others bowed their heads. Alexander felt his breath catch. "Father," the king lifted a hand, "do not thank me yet. The world will not be kind to this choice. Are you prepared to bear that weight?" Alexander took Alelena's hand. "I am." The king turned to her. "And you, Miss Whitmore, you will be watched, judged, blamed. You will be called unworthy by those who fear what you represent. Will you endure it?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I have endured worse. I will endure for him." The king nodded once. "Then so be it." He turned to the council. "Let it be announced. My son will marry Elelena Whitmore. This matter is closed." The room fell into stunned silence. Princess Charlotte let out a breath she had been holding and pressed a hand to her mouth. Alexander closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, steady again. The king dismissed the council. As the nobles filed out, some with anger, some with awe, the future reshaped itself in their wake. Later that day, word spread through the palace. Servants whispered in disbelief. Courtiers watched Elelena with new eyes. Some bowed too deeply. Others avoided her entirely. That evening, the king summoned Elelena alone. She entered his study quietly. He sat by the fire, the crown set aside, looking not like a ruler, but like an old man tired of carrying history. "You will marry my son," he said, "but know this. Love will not shield you from the court. Only your character will." She inclined her head. "Then I will rely on that." He studied her. "You remind me of the woman I failed. Perhaps this is how I make amends." She did not speak. Gratitude felt too small. The wedding was arranged swiftly. There would be no long delay to feed rumor. The people would see certainty, not doubt. On the morning of the ceremony, snow fell softly over the palace gardens. Elenina stood in a simple white gown, lace at her sleeves, no jewels save a small silver clasp at her throat. Princess Charlotte smiled at her through tears. "You look like peace itself." "I feel like a borrowed miracle," Elenina replied softly. The chapel filled quickly. Nobles stood beside villagers. Servants lined the walls. Outside, bells rang across the city. Alexander waited at the altar, his uniform dark and simple. When Elenina appeared, all sound faded. She walked toward him with quiet grace, her chin lifted, her steps sure. He took her hands, his voice low. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she whispered. "So am I." But not enough to turn back. The vows were spoken plainly. No grandeur, no excess, only truth. "I take you," Alexander said, "not for duty, but for honesty." "I take you," she replied, "not for a crown, but for the man who stood alone and did not bow." When they kissed, the chapel filled with sound. Applause, cheers. The bells rang louder than before. Outside, the crowd gathered in the courtyard erupted in celebration. Some had come out of curiosity, others out of hope, many out of disbelief. Elenina stepped onto the balcony beside Alexander. The cold air rushed up to meet them. Faces looked up, waiting. Alexander raised his hand. "This kingdom has known pride," he said. "Today it chooses sincerity." He turned to her. "Stand with me." She did. As winter turned to spring, the kingdom adjusted. The Northern Alliance withdrew, but war did not come. Trade slowed, then found new paths. The people, seeing their prince walk among them with a woman who spoke kindly and listened deeply, softened. Elenina visited villages quietly. She spoke with mothers. She read with children. She listened more than she spoke. They called her the Quiet Queen. Alexander ruled with renewed purpose. In council, he asked harder questions. He dismissed flatterers. He trusted fewer voices, but listened more carefully. One evening, as they walked through the gardens where roses began to bloom, Elenina said softly, "Do you ever regret it?" "Never," he replied. "Not even when they whisper." "Let them whisper," he said. "They once laughed. We survived that." She smiled. "We did." The joke that once centered a court became a story told in homes and markets, not of beauty found, but of dignity recognized. And in time, the laughter faded, replaced by something quieter and stronger, respect.